So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Aaron, who joins us from Sydney. Aaron and I used to work together in a previous life, but Aaron has moved on to Microsoft, where he's a cloud developer advocate. And he was telling us in the breakout session that he does a little bit of everything, and that's part of his job, is getting to try different things and then telling the developer community how things work and getting us interested in technology. If you can move on, I did ask the question in the breakout. I'm not sure we actually got to hear Aaron's answer, but I follow him on Twitter, and he posted this picture of a 20-kilogram tub of Nutella. So maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about that as we learn more about GitHub Actions from you. Over to you, Aaron. Oh, by the way, we will do questions. If you put your questions in the chat, we'll save them to the end, and Lou will kindly facilitate the Q&A at the end of the talk.
Awesome. I'm going to kick off the large amount of Nutella for screen sharing, and we'll do that. Do I need sound? No. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to make vague assumptions that everyone can see things. I will actually put the chat open as well, because if people do want to ask, or you want to have something kind of point in time, I'm happy for people to chime in that way, as well as keep questions towards the end. I mean, ultimately the goal is to make sure that everyone gets something out of this session, and I feel like the more interactive I can make this, the better experience it's going to be for everyone. But yes, thanks for having me. As said, my name is Aaron Powell, and I work at Microsoft as a cloud developer advocate. And I do have a 19.75 something kilo tub of Nutella sitting downstairs. It was 20 kilos, but it is slightly less than that now. My wife works at a volunteer food pantry, so they get food donated to them from like food service, so restaurants, cafes, stuff like that. They also get a lot of stuff donated from the large supermarket chains, and one of the like a restaurant or something here in Sydney that, well, currently can't serve in person, had a 20-kilo tub of Nutella that was it's coming up to its best before date, and they couldn't do anything with it, so they donated it. And the food pantry was like, what the heck are we going to do with a 20-kilo thing of Nutella? We can't give this, like, how do you give this away? So my wife brought it home. If anyone is wondering, there is 1,333 serves of Nutella in a 20-kilo tub. That is enough to cause diabetes in several large humans, and I will be a testament to that in probably another week or two. So right now I have a Nutella blondie, so it's a like a white chocolate based brownie with Nutella spilled through it. But my kids are definitely having a taste for Nutella. But yes, we had Nutella crepes on the weekend. My wife made those as well. So yes, we like everything. Like anyone that has Nutella recipes, please send them my way. I'm looking at Nutella cocktails and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, I digress. You're not here to learn about Nutella. I mean, if you were, then that's a weird choice to have managed to be at this meetup. But we're here to talk about DevOps. If you want to reach out to me after the session or anything like that, my contact details are up there on the screen, Twitter, etc. Do feel free to reach out, and I will do my best to answer questions if I don't get to them now. We're here to talk about GitHub Actions. Oh, and by the way, all the links I've got QR codes for as well on the slides, so feel free to use that instead of trying to frantically type down a URL as it appears. So we're here to talk about GitHub Actions. And what is GitHub Actions? Well, fundamentally, it's a way to automate workflows within inside of your GitHub repo based off of events that happen within inside of GitHub. So this is very much tied to GitHub as an ecosystem. I was mentioning in the breakout rooms, it's going to be particularly relevant if you're using GitHub as your source control and for all of the facilities that you have around building applications, issue tracking, etc. If you're not using all that kind of stuff, you kind of get diminishing returns on what GitHub Actions can give you. But let's say that you wanted to do something when a pull request comes in, or when an issue is created, or as like a cron job that happens on like a certain schedule. That's the kind of thing that we can do with GitHub Actions. Like it's very similar to probably a lot of DevOps tools or these automation platforms that you're probably familiar with, whether it's like pipelines or GitLab or Travis CI or Circle CI or any of those sorts of things. You define a bunch of tasks, a bunch of steps to be run to complete a task, and that's what will happen. These tasks are they can be comprised of as few or as many steps as you want to achieve it, like some sort of an end goal. The actions or the steps within inside of your workflow can be built as either in Node.js as JavaScript actions or in shipped as Docker containers, and I'll talk a bit more about that as well. And you can host these task runs yourself on your own infrastructure or in your own cloud managed infrastructure, or you can use the ones provided by GitHub and through the GitHub Cloud or whatever their backend system is. Now, commonly this will be used for your continuous integration, continuous deployment style tasks. So build an application, deploy it, so on and so forth. But it could be much more than that, and we'll talk a bit about that as we go through the presentation. This is the example of a GitHub Actions workflow that I use actually to deploy my blog. It's actually a very subset of it because it is quite a long action. And inside of this one, I've broken it down into it's essentially a multi-stage workflow. Now, first off, defining some things like environment variables and some metadata around it, defining the sorts of events that will trigger this workflow to run. And then what is it going to do? Well, it's going to do things like it's going to build the search indexer on my website, which is actually a Blazor application, whereas the rest of my website is it's a statically generated Hugo application. So I run those in parallel. The results of those are merged together to build the search index that is available through Lucene, and then ultimately deploy that to Azure. You might notice in the left-hand column there's a job called close pull request job that's crossed out, and that's because it's a step in my pipeline that didn't need to be executed because some condition happened. You can go if you want to see this like the history of this job, you can check out that, or you go to my GitHub repo and look at this. Is a fairly old run. It was not run 7 days ago. This one was run probably a couple of months ago, but you can see that a more recent run and stuff like that. So let's have a breakdown what makes up a GitHub action. First off, you start with YAML, because nothing says configuration like code. Configuration is code, like massive amounts of white space, obscure decisions on whether or not something is a string or a number or anything like that. I'm not a huge fan of YAML. There's definitely things I don't like about it, but it's fairly common inside of these sort of workflow tools to define things like the metadata around an action. So the action itself, what kind of inputs might it have, what kind of outputs might it give, how's it going to execute scripts that it's going to run with inside of itself. And the inputs and outputs. But then the action itself can be one of two things. As I mentioned, it can either be JavaScript actions, and these ones build as just a Node app, the same as you would build any other kind of Node application, whether it's in like TypeScript, so you're compiling it to JavaScript, or you're running it in like plain old JavaScript. You can build it that way, and then because this is running as a Node application, you can use it with any kind of dependencies that you want to run from NPM or any other third-party package registry that you might be working with, and there are shipped packages that are doing common interactions with GitHub. So things like working with the OctoKit GitHub Node API wrapper. So you've got that, and it's pre-auth for you. So you don't have to worry about setting up the OAuth connection and all that kind of stuff. You get your token in, and then it takes care of all the other authenticated options for you. You don't have to kind of do those ceremonies yourself, but you can pull in any third-party Node package that you want as well. JavaScript actions can be run on any of the supported OSs, so Windows, Mac, and Linux, which means that it's kind of like write once, run anywhere sort of like a workflow job that you might be doing. But you do have to work out how you're going to manage the dependencies within inside of that action. So let's say that you're creating a custom action that is going to be updating an issue based off of some heuristics. Well, you might be pulling a couple of node modules that do that. Well, when that action runs, how do you make sure all those dependencies are there? Because your workflow system isn't going to set up all of your workflow systems by backend dependencies. It's going to focus on the code it needs to build. So there's some nuances that we'll have a look shortly. I'm going to jump into code. The other approach is to use Docker as a way to build actions to run within inside of GitHub Actions. Obviously, the advantage of Docker is that you can run any language, any runtime. So if you're not a Node person, you can run it in Go or .NET or Rust or pick your flavor of language. But the downside is that you have a bit less seamless integration with GitHub as an ecosystem, because, well, it has no kind of visibility into what you're doing with inside of your actions. So the thing that you're going to run for a workflow step. So you're kind of on your own. If you need to authenticate against the GitHub API, you need to manage that connection authentication. And if you need to do anything else, it's entirely up to you to manage all of that. But that does come with flexibility, right? You're no longer tied to the Node and the Node ecosystem and JavaScript as a programming language. And I know a lot of people are not a huge fan of that. The thing with Docker Actions is that they're only going to work on the Linux Linux action runners, because you have to start up a Docker environment, and it's going to be a Linux Docker environment. It's not running Windows containers. So this does mean that it can be a little bit slower because you're tied to one particular type of action runner, and you have to have the overhead of pulling down a whole Docker image. But let's jump out of slides for a moment and actually have a look at what GitHub Actions, how we can go about creating a GitHub action and a workflow associated with that. We're going to come to a VS Code environment over here. So this is just a super simple little playground that I've created. And with GitHub Actions, they live inside of a GitHub .github folder in the root of Git repo. And then we have our workflows folder, and then a workflow that we're going to execute. So I've created one here that is going to execute on a couple of different events. So workflow dispatch, so I can come in and I can manually trigger this one. I'm also going to be able to run this on a push to a particular branch. So this is just onto the main branch. Or if someone opens an issue against this repository, then it's going to execute that. We then have the jobs. So all the different stages that we might have within inside of a GitHub workflow. GitHub Actions workflow. In this case, I've just got one called run sample, but we have as many as we need, and we can define them to either run in parallel or in a serial. What operating system is going to run on? This is running on the Ubuntu runtime, or sorry, the Ubuntu Actions runner, and then what steps is it going to need? I've actually got a custom action within inside of this repo that we're going to execute, but you still need to run the checkout action because, well, you need to get the source code of this particular action. If you're using third-party actions such as checkout, they are pointing to GitHub repos. So it assumes the HTTPS colon /github.com prefix, and then it is the account or organization / repo name. And then it's always recommended that you attach to a specific tag or a char or something like that, rather than just like @main. Because if you do @main, well, you're just saying whatever's kind of the most recent commit is what you're going to be running. Whereas here I'm saying I want the V2 checkout action to be run. And then, as I said, I've got this sample action that lives inside of my actions folder. And this is just going to be only usable with inside of this code base here. I've written this as in TypeScript. I've got a bunch of packages and stuff like that. A bunch of stuff set up so that we get ESLint and Prettier and so on and so forth. And the way that they work is that you give it a function entry point that's going to run. So it's going to execute this main.ts file here. This is just running an asynchronous function. So it's going to return a promise. And then we just execute it immediately. So this is how, when this step in my workflow is hit, it executes this. All I've got here is it's just going to do a console.log statement that's just dumping out the GitHub context. So the context of this action and then the payload, which is what triggered this action. I set this up and pushed it up earlier, and because it's testing DevOps pipelines, I had a bunch of ones that didn't work before I got the one that I wanted to work. Hands up who has like successfully deployed a CI/CD pipeline first time. Yeah, no one does that. There's always that broken commit, and you're just like, damn it, YAML. And there's like 5 commits that it's just like trying to fix white space. Oh, I forgot to do X. And yeah, that was basically what I did here. So let's just have a look at this, this particular run. As I said, this is just dumped out some really simple, it's just dumped out the JSON payload. We'll grab this all the way through to the end. Come back to, oops, what did I think I've opened something, that one. There, and JSON, and then we will format the document just so we can see. So this was this one was triggered by a push to that repo, and we can see that these are the shards that were relevant to it. This is the commits that were that came up inside of that. So this was just a single commit that went up there. It was the author, the committer, there was the shard of that particular commit, what was the commit message, URL to the commit, and a whole bunch of other like useful information so that you can come in here, like you can do the kinds of things that might be fairly relevant for what you want to inspect on something that's happened. So let's just say, come into here and, whoops, where did we go? There we go. And let's go from GitHub, we'll do context.issue, and then let's say we'll create a new issue. Oh wait, sorry, it's not issue dot. Hang on. Should remember this off the top of my head, but I don't. Issue dot issue repo. No. This is what happens when you go off script and you're like, hey, I can. Oh, that's right. I want. Got the octokit. Const octokit equals GitHub .get octokit. So this gives you the authenticated access to the octokit API. So you can work with the GitHub API and do that kind of stuff. But in essence of time, I'm actually not going to try and live code from memory. Instead, we'll come back into here, we'll go to actions, we'll go to issues, because this is going to trigger on creating a new issue. And we go, hello, DevOps Perth, and I'm a new issue. So this, when created, will then trigger that action to run. So if we jump over to actions, we'll see that that's executed. So you could be doing something in here like capturing that issue has been created, having a look at the issue, maybe automatically assigning a person. Some of the stuff that you might do with a GitHub app, but you could, it's a lot easier to customize to your business's needs and that sort of stuff. So there we go, we've run that sample, and now we've got a slightly different JSON payload. If we just copy this, come back into here, we'll create a new one as JSON and document. So this time, the action was triggered by open, whereas here, this was based off of like a commit created. So we get now we've got a different payload. We can get information about the issue. Who was the user that created that issue? What was the repository information and all that kind of stuff. So we can see that we get a lot of information that we can work with inside of this, and it's going to be contextualized to the style of a problem that we're trying to solve with a GitHub action. And this particular step here, it's the same code that I'm running, whether I'm pushing to a branch, triggering a workflow manually, or opening an issue. Anything that you can do with webhooks in GitHub, you can capture with actions. So that's like comments on an issue, pull requests created against specific branches to trigger different workflows, so on and so forth. But let's continue on with slides. And I want to talk about a specific scenario that we might tackle with GitHub Actions, and that's a release process. So we've seen that there's a lot of things that you can do, but how can we go about, say, deploying an application into our production infrastructure, whether it's into the cloud or into our own like on-premise infrastructure. Like, how can we go to do that? Or in this specific example that I'll bring up shortly, publish an open source package to a package registry like npm or NuGet. So initially, like, we kind of get stuck because there's this third-party process that we've got to go. Like, we have some sort of event that's happened, and that's initiating the create a new release. Maybe it's a release that's been created within inside of GitHub itself. We've tagged a commit with a tag that indicates it's release. We've merged into the release branch, whatever it might be. So what we needed to do is, well, the next thing we need to do is, well, that event's happened. We're going to respond to that by building our code, running our tests, doing the sorts of things that validates that this kind of bundle that we've got is ready to be given to our production environment. But then we need to wait for some sort of approval process. For a long time, this was a real difficult thing to achieve with GitHub Actions, because ultimately you want to release to the target environment, whether it's a staging environment, it's a pre-prod, it's production, whatever it is. Like, you want to have that approval process in there. So how do we go about doing that? I've just realized that that my start bar was above the link that I had. Let's go back. So last year, at the start of last year, I wrote a blog post on how to do approval workflows with GitHub Actions. Basically, what it was doing was when the event happened, it would go ahead and create an issue within inside of the issue register that for that GitHub repo that said there's a release needing approval, and then you would tag the issue with a specific tag, which would then trigger another workflow in GitHub Actions that if the tag was approved, it would then go ahead and deploy it to the target environment. But if you tagged it with rejected, it would then cancel that release and not go forward. And it was doing a bunch of stuff around automatically adding comments to issues. It was generating release notes and putting them in places for review, uploading assets so that you had those available for going between each of the different independent workflows and all that sort of stuff. So if you want to see how far you can really push GitHub Actions and the level of complexity that you can do with custom actions, go ahead and check that out. But then GitHub released environments, which basically solved the problem that I was doing a custom workaround to try and solve. Now, environments defined as part of the GitHub repo that you're working with. So they're specific. They're a concept that's inside of GitHub. They can represent whatever you need them to represent. They don't have to represent your practice. They don't have to be named the same as like your cloud environment, or they don't have to be named the same as your like the package registries you're publishing to, because they're part of your repo. They're a construct that you want to put some information around. And because they're part of your GitHub repo, is that they can have their own set of secret variables. So if you have API keys that you need to use, or publishing credentials and stuff like that, you can have them per environment, and your workflow doesn't need to think about whether it's getting the staging ones versus the production ones, or the NuGet versus the NPM ones, or whatever it might be. It just has secrets that are relevant for that particular environment. And then, most importantly, we can define protection rules. What will stop this environment or the workflow associated with this environment from being triggered? Right now, there's only two style of protection rules. There is someone has to approve. So basically go in and click a button saying, yep, go ahead. And that is, I think you can have up to 6 people listed as can tick that approval button, or a timeout event. So basically it's got to wait a number of minutes, hours, or whatever before it will automatically release that environment. I don't quite know the scenario that you want to use the second one of just like basically saying don't deploy for 5 hours. I don't quite know when that might be applicable, but I'm sure there are scenarios out there because obviously they've built for it. The other thing that's kind of useful, it's not only related to environments, because this exists in a variety of manners inside of GitHub, but you can use protection rules on environments so that only certain branches can trigger those that environment. So you can't push the dev branch to production, for example. Now, there are other forms of protection rules within inside of GitHub around branches and stuff like that, which sound like they overlap, but they're intended to be used for different scenarios. So let's create a release strategy with GitHub Actions. So this is our workflow that we want to type. An event has happened that's indicated a release is available. We're going to build our code, wait for approval, and then release the type. So we're going to push a tag. We're going to run a git checkout on that code. We're going to then perform a build and test against that, all the sorts of things that validates that the code is ready. And then we're going to create an NPM package that we can push to, and we're going to create a GitHub release. The NPM package we're not going to deploy yet, and we're not going to publish that release because we're both waiting for me to approve that. I will come back to the question in the chat momentarily. So assuming that I say, yep, all good, we will then move on to the next stage of our workflow, which is we'll trigger the release as approved. We'll download that package that's previously been generated because we don't want to rebuild it. We'll then publish it to GitHub release. We'll then push to NPM and we'll publish the package to GitHub packages. Now, just on the topic of protection rules, the question was asked in the chat, can you create your own custom protection rules? The answer to that is no, at least not at the moment. I mean, I can't speak for what the roadmap is going to be of GitHub Actions, but right now you can't build your own custom protection rules. So this can be a limiting factor when working with GitHub Actions, particularly if you've been using a much more complex workflow system such as Azure Pipelines that has a lot more complexity around how you can do gating and staging and protection of stages within inside of a workflow that gets published out. GitHub Actions is much more simplistic in that regards. Okay, so let's have a look at a release pipeline with GitHub Actions in action. So we'll come back to here. So here is another repository. So this is one of my open source projects. And we have a not build, NPM, so NPM release. So I actually have three workflows in here. One which deploys the website, one which will be triggered on any push to the main branch. This is essentially doing a build and test one. So this is just kind of the smoke testing and stuff like that. But what's that? Okay, this is the one. So when I create a tag version V or tag something with V star, so kind of indicating there's a version number, this is what it's going to execute. It is going to, it has a build job, and then it has a release job. It has a publish to NPM and publish to GitHub package registry. Build job, not particularly revolutionary in terms of what it does. We're defining a couple of environment variables that we'll I'll show in a little while. But they're things that we'll be using as outputs. Whoops, my mouse is jumping all around the screen. Okay, so we're going to check out the code, and we're going to need the source code to be able to do a build. We're going to create a release in GitHub, a GitHub releases release. Yeah, that's good enough terminology. I good speakies today. It's late for me compared to you folks in Perth. So this is using actions create release. So this is going to create that for me. I pass in the GitHub token. I don't think I actually need to do that. I think GitHub token is automatically passed in. I can't remember whether I actually needed that. And then I'm providing it with some input arguments to that. So what is the tag that we're creating this release for? It's the current ref that triggered this workflow. What is going to be the release name? Well, the release is going to be the release and then that ref. We're sending this as a draft, but it's not a pre-release. Then we're going to use, we're going to set up a node environment. We're going to run npm CI, lint, build, pack, common It's just as essentially a bash script. We're then going to upload the artifact to this release. So this gets that TGZ file, so that's the npm package that's been generated, and then uploads it as an asset attached to this release, so to this workflow. I'm then just grabbing out the tag name itself by just using a little bit of bash foo there. I then upload the package to the GitHub action that was generated. So this is, stop it, mouse. When I created the release, I gave it an ID of create release, which we can see up here on line 23. And that's so that I can refer to it down here on line 51. Now, anyone that's worked with GitHub releases via the API is that if you want to upload files to attach to a release, you only do that after the release has been created. And when you create the release via the API, it gives you a URL where you have to then send the uploads to. So because that's the workflow that they've got it. I'm sure there's a very good reason for it, and I just don't know it off the top of my head. But we're going to upload the TGZ file to there. I'm going to give it a name, and this is why. So I get the environment variable of the tag name, which we generated a few steps above, and then set it as a zip file. I'm also uploading release.txt, which is just going to contain the release information so that we can get that later. So if we have, let's just cut a release. Wait, am I using changelog. It's my own open source project, so I can do what I like with it. 1.2.1, and then we'll give this, what's the date? It is the 25th, 08-25. Changed, bumped version for fun. And then I just need to come in and update my package JSON to be that. Okay, so just check, yeah, add git commit, testing, pipeline. And then we will git tag dash v, no, tag v 1.2.1. And we'll git push tags. And assuming that I haven't like magically broken something since the last time I actually ran this, where did my browser go? Yeah. Oh, I could have just merged some pull requests. Those open pull requests are going to be depend bot, I'm sure. Okay, so this is what's going to happen. So it's going to be performing that build operation. We'll give that a moment. We go, npm run CI, it's going to do all of that stuff. Look how fast it is. Isn't the cloud amazing? All right, and now if we come back here, you'll see that it has a little like clock icon against it, and that's indicating that it has a release that I need to approve. Some sort of approval that I need to do. So it's saying that it wants the deployment done. I've also got the release has been generated here. Here's that zip file, which is here's that release package that we're going to be deploying. And this is then got, why do I have a serverless Sydney environment? That's fun. I have a protection rule on a environment called release. So I'm the approver. There's a wait timer that I don't have there. The one thing that I've always get tripped out is that you've got to remember to click save. If you don't click save, like I can add someone else here, and if I forget to press save, it doesn't save, despite that some parts of the GitHub UI automatically save for you. But this is this is our environment. It's ready to go, and we have our action that is currently waiting. But how does it know to wait? Because I've defined a bunch of stuff in that GitHub in the web UI. I've created that environment there, but then I have like just a YAML file that has no real relationship to that web UI. So how does it know what to do? Well, we come down to our releases. We'll see that here I've defined an environment and its name is release. So this is saying that this YAML file is, or this step of our workflow is related to an environment called release, and it's going to do something once that happens. It also needs build to have completed successfully. Technically, you don't need to do that one because the release environment is denoting a that there is some sort of approval workflow that needs to be completed first. But but then you could theoretically approve the release before the build has completed. So yeah, it's probably a good idea to have it in there, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. What are the steps it's going to do? Well, it's going to download the package. It's going to then use the release ID, and that's what it's going to download. So that's how we know what it is. We then will update the GitHub release. So mark that as it's no longer draft, it's now a approved release. We're then also going to publish to NPM. So this is going to wait until the release step has completed. So this is, instead of having multiple stages of our workflow all dependent on the same environment, I've just changed them slightly differently. It will then download the package, and then this will publish it to the NPM registry. I also do the same thing to publish to GitHub packages. So let's go review deployments, give it a thing. I'm happy with this. Hit approve and deploy. And then that's going to go on there. If we just pop this into another window, we'll see under my releases, we have this draft release here. Ooh, I have an old draft release that should be gone. I'll delete that one later, but there we go. There is release v121 that has been approved. It is currently published to GitHub package registry and to NPM, and then in a few minutes time, there'll be a new version of my library out there that has had nothing else changed. Now, while this is obviously publishing a package to package registries, this sort of a workflow can be applied to whether you're doing a deployment to a cloud environment or to any sort of infrastructure that you might need. So that's how we can use it for your kind of standard CI/CD sort of process. But what if we wanted to go kind of beyond CI/CD? I wanted to show two kind of interesting examples of using GitHub Actions to just sort of show the flexibility that you get out of it as a platform. The first is on my GitHub profile. So if you go to github.com/AaronPowell, I have a bunch of information about me, but I also have I think it's the 5 most recent blog posts I've published. But that gets updated automatically every time I publish a new blog post. And the way that works is that I have this GitHub action that's on workflow dispatch. So this can be triggered by a webhook. And when it runs, it will then download my RSS feed. It will then grab the top 5 posts and update a section of my markdown file, commit that back into my repo, and then my profile gets updated. So so I have then a separate thing elsewhere that as soon as I've published, as part of my deployment website, as soon as that happens, it will then trigger off this workflow dispatch. And then I get my GitHub profile updated. So that's actually it's a GitHub action that is updating itself and updating its own Git repo. So you can do that. So that's a definitely valid scenario. Just be aware that if you've got workflows that are going to then depend on like pushes to a particular branch, you might accidentally trigger them. So you could have like a workflow that triggers another workflow that then triggers another workflow, and you just have like this infinite circle of workflows that just keep self-running. Just something to be careful of. This one is from one of my friends. She works at GitHub, Mish Manners. She has her GitHub contribution graph getting eaten by a snake, but playing like old school Snake. And that she regenerates this every 6 hours. So as she pushes to GitHub, it will regenerate a new version of this SVG that is then displayed on her profile. So it's always fairly up to date with what her GitHub contributions are. And I've seen other things where people have created chess games. So essentially you can play chess through people's GitHub profiles, and that uses like a combination of actions and custom webhooks and stuff like that. So like you click on, like you play moves, and that will automatically trigger updates to profile pages and things like that. So while not everyone needs to generate an SVG on a schedule, this kind of shows the way that you can sort of stretch the value of GitHub Actions beyond thinking of it as a workflow file to just build and deploy applications to environments. But that's kind of enough of me rambling on. So just to kind of wrap up, GitHub Actions are workflows that responds to events within inside of GitHub. Whether that event is code that's being pushed up to a repo, something that's happened in your issues, or someone creating a pull request, or anything in between. That's the sort of thing that you can trigger as with a GitHub Actions workflow. Jobs that happen within inside of that can be tied to environments that they represent. So you could have an environment that represents your staging and your production, and you can have things that are your actual workflow steps. Workflow jobs can be tied to those. Each of those environments can then have their own protection rules that control who can and can't access them from a deployment standpoint. Obviously, you've got other protection rules to stop every developer in the company being able to log into the production SQL database. But this is more about just the deployment side of things. And then you can use them to represent deployment targets, whether that is a resource in a cloud environment, or it's a like a package registry that you're wanting to publish an open source library to. You could even have them as like other Git repos that you're triggering things against. But it's more than just a CI/CD tool. It's an automation platform for anything that's relevant within inside of a particular project. And you can use it to do something as simple as update an RSS feed, or something as complex as make it possible to play a game of chess inside of a markdown file. That kind of brings me to the end of what I wanted to cover off tonight. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening. And I hope you've learned a couple of new things about the power you can get out of GitHub Actions and what you can do with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. I really appreciate you giving up your time, particularly being 2 hours ahead of us on the East Coast there. I definitely learned a fair bit tonight, and much appreciated. So we haven't got any questions in chat. If people want to come off mute and just ask, feel free to ask a question. I might selfishly steal the mic while I've got it and just ask one of my own. So as someone who uses Azure DevOps pipelines predominantly, and you might have sort of anticipated this question might come, what's the guidance for moving ahead with GitHub Actions, and how should companies and customers of ours consider when to make the transition and how?
Yeah, I'm not surprised that someone was asking this question. So if you are already using GitHub, like for your source code, for backlog management, for that kind of stuff, I would encourage you to use GitHub Actions as your first point of call. If you're already using, but if you're not using GitHub, or it's not like a primary integrated part of the way that you're doing your application management, then if you're using Azure DevOps for that, then stick with Azure pipelines as you build and release. The other reason why if you were using GitHub to host your source code, to do backlog management, etc., the other reason why I would consider still using some like Azure pipelines is if you needed more control over the way you do release management. Like I showed, it's fairly simplistic in terms of the way that you can do gated releases and stuff like that. You kind of have just like people can approve is really the level of complexity, whereas I know Azure Pipelines has a lot more stuff that you can do in that. So I guess that's my recommendation. Like if you're already using GitHub, definitely check it out and see if GitHub Actions is the right fit for you. I will always use GitHub Actions first before I go back to Azure Pipelines because I like having everything centered around that one platform. Like I don't want to have to jump from GitHub to Azure Pipelines and back again to watch a build and then see like a release that's appearing inside of GitHub. If you can put everything in GitHub Actions, try that. But there are definitely some limitations that you're not going to be able to get around the level of complexity.
Cool, thanks. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I had one I just put in the chat about the focus for GitHub Actions roadmap heading forward. Are they going to focus on its flexibility and its programmability sort of thing, or are they going to focus more on maturing this environments concept and so forth? And yeah.
So as someone who isn't in the team, I can totally say anything I like and they can't hold me to it. So from what I understand from talking to like the folks in the Actions team and the folks working on that kind of a platform, the goal is to try and get as much sort of feature parity as there is with other DevOps platforms that there are out there. So if you think of where the complexity lies in something like Azure Pipelines or like maybe a Travis CI or something like that, there's a lot of stuff that they do that it's just simply not possible in GitHub Actions, particularly when you're looking at it from an enterprise space. That's where something like Azure Pipelines or Bamboo, like they're much, much richer from an enterprise space. So I would expect that a lot of the investment is going to be around enriching that experience with inside of Azure Pipelines, with inside of GitHub Actions to bring it more as a direct competitor to an enterprise organization, not just to an open source developer. Another thing that I really hope is on their roadmap, which I haven't seen yet, is some better test integration. If we think about Azure Pipelines has phenomenal abilities to show like, here's test information. Like you've done an NPM test or you've done a .NET test and you've got all of your test results that have come back, and you can inspect through it and that kind of stuff. I love that about Azure Pipelines. That does not exist in GitHub Actions. You can run NPM test or .NET test or whatever it is for your platform, but you then have to parse the logs yourself to kind of go, oh, yep, there's a test file and here is like 1,000-line log file and I'm trying to find where that test was. I really hope that is going to be something that they make better. And from what I understand of the team, I would expect that is coming. It is on their roadmap.
Okay, cool.
All right, anybody else?
Yeah, I've got one question. So this is kind of a general question. Because of the kind of difficulty with testing the GitHub Actions, do you kind of find yourself, let's say, writing a script that you can test locally and make sure it works, and then having the GitHub Action call that script? Or do you kind of go the other way where maybe you have like a branch and you have the GitHub Action on a branch and you use that to kind of test your GitHub Action out until it's ready to go?
Part of me will YOLO it straight through to prod. So okay, I did a massive overhaul of one of my open source projects and the GitHub Actions pipeline that I had there. And there was a lot of commits that don't need to be there that I probably should squash in the Git history. But no, I did most of that in a branch and tested that in a branch separately. But there is a tool that I have found. I cannot for the life of me remember it, and mostly because it's someone's created an open source tool and they've given it a quirky name, and it's like, great, I'm never going to remember what that name is. But the goal of it is to actually run actions locally. So you can run your whole pipeline locally. If you're using Docker-based actions, this is obviously a lot easier because you can just pull that image down and then you can run that image locally. If it's a node action, it's a little bit trickier because you have to do a few more things to maybe try and facilitate the GitHub context that would be in existence. But like I said, I wish I could have found the name of it before coming on tonight. And but I would highly encourage someone to go out and do like better Google searching than I've been able to do to find it. But I remember it's written in Go, which again doesn't help me in terms of trying to find it. Like Go GitHub Action Runner, like that's like maybe the language Go is just because you didn't want it to be searchable, I reckon. But yeah, there is definitely a tool out there that allows you to give a level of confidence of running a GitHub Action workflow entirely locally. So yeah.
In terms of your approach, do you kind of go down that path and try and develop it and test it locally, or do you kind of give up on that approach, just create a branch and point it at a branch version?
I'll tend to try and build my workflows piece by piece. So I know enough to get like the basic build test, like your really primitive sort of workflow done. It's once you're going to that next step of I want to automate creating releases, I want to automate pushing to a cloud environment, or I want to publish a package to a registry and stuff like that. Those are the things that will trip me up more likely than not. So yeah, I'll either put them into like start in a branch and accept the fact that I'm going to be going into my GitHub releases and deleting a bunch of dud releases because I broke something along the way, and I'm going to be doing a lot of git push -f to override tags that I've created. And then once I'm happy with it, then merge that back into main and have the branch set up that way.
Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? You kind of got the two approaches. You either try and test it locally, or you kind of just go the cloud first approach and accept it's not going to work the first time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's one of those things like DevOps pipelines are just notoriously difficult to not have fail, and not accept that you're going to fail. I know I always joke with people that you end up creating you create a dummy repo, and that's where you do all of your pipeline testing, and it's got like 50 failed pipeline runs, and they're like, okay, sweet, this workflow works. Delete that repo, start again. Hey, look, it worked first time. I've definitely not done that before.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, last chance for questions. Going once, going twice.
It's an interesting. It's not a question; it's a statement, but it's usually what was just spoken about there. Because I'm starting to think about it more and more all the time. Is we always talk about with DevOps, we're starting to talk about the developer experience. What about the DevOps experience? The DevOps experience is just atrocious. Like, I get 100 commit messages from people trying to push the pipelines because they need to run through pipelines. They don't have their own environment, so they're going to pinch an environment off the dev team or whatever because it's too expensive to run up a DevOps. It's just hard work. And there's a talk there somewhere. I don't know what it is, but yeah.
Yeah, for a long time, I was very much in the camp of script as much of it. So have bash scripts or like make files or something like that, so that you could simulate running it locally. So I could just run the files in sequence locally, and then pass in the appropriate command line arguments. But as
the richness in the cloud has grown,
yeah, it just has become harder and harder to try and achieve that. Where I've got things that are suitably complex, so one of my open source projects, I do automated release note generation. I do like a bunch of other complex stuff. Those are all pre-scripted that I can run from the command line on my machine, because they don't require anything to happen that can't happen locally. It's when you're starting to do things like, how do I push an artifact to a release pipeline that could be downloaded elsewhere, or when I'm trying to create a release inside of GitHub, or when I'm trying to update an issue in the GitHub issues, like that kind of stuff. I'm just like, well, I accept that I'm going to be just spinning wheels for a while and parsing through log files on my own.
Yeah. On that somber note.
I'm going to keep eating Nutella.
You've got a lot of work to do there. All right, I think we can safely call it a night. Mate, thank you very much. I really appreciate you joining us late at night in your lockdown. Stay safe. Yeah, everyone else, we'll have the recording up for the session for your reference later, and follow Aaron. And yeah, thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time. Cheers, everyone.
See you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Aaron.